The underestimated genius Alex had always been different. Growing up in a small neighborhood in a city that often overlooked the talents of those who didn't fit the mold, Alex had learned early on that his brilliance could be both a gift and a curse. His parents, both hard-working individuals with limited formal education, had always told him that intelligence wasn't about the school you attended or the degrees you held. It was about the ability to think beyond the conventional, to see patterns where others saw only chaos. From a young age, Alex devoured every math book he could find, racing through advanced concepts before his peers even knew what algebra was. But in a world that often judged people by the color of their skin or the accents of their parents, Alex knew that his true potential would never be fully recognized in the places that mattered most. When he was accepted into the prestigious Ivy League university, a wave of pride and apprehension washed over him. He had earned his place, no doubt about it, but something gnawed at him deep inside. Would his classmates and professors see him for what he truly was, a prodigy, or would they dismiss him as just another student from the wrong side of the tracks trying to punch above his weight? He didn't know what to expect, but he had no intention of being anyone's token student or proving anything to anyone. He was there for one reason: to show the world what he was capable of, no matter what they thought of him. The first day of class arrived, and Alex found himself sitting at the back of an oversized lecture hall. The room was filled with the brightest minds in the country, and the murmurs of excited conversation buzzed through the air. As students took their seats, Alex scanned the room, observing the subtle hierarchies already forming. There were the preppy students who seemed to have everything figured out, the nerdy types who looked like they had just stepped out of a textbook, and the jocks who were more interested in their next game than the next equation. But none of them had anything that set them apart in the way Alex did. They were all just people trying to fit in, while Alex was someone who had already figured out that fitting in wasn't the answer. He had come to make his mark. Dr. Harris, the course professor, walked into the room, exuding the kind of authority that only years of academic acclaim could provide. He had a reputation for being one of the finest minds in the field of mathematics, his lectures revered for their depth and complexity. Alex had read some of Dr. Harris's papers, but none of it intimidated him. He had spent his entire life being underestimated, and this was no different. As Dr. Harris scanned the room, Alex couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in the professor's expression when his eyes landed on him. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a flicker of judgment, an assumption that Alex, just by the way he looked, could never belong in a room like this. The first lecture began with a simple problem, one that had been part of the curriculum for years. It was something Alex could solve in his sleep, but as he listened to the professor explain the problem, he noticed how the other students were struggling with the basics. They were all scribbling notes, whispering to each other, their hands raised, waiting for some sort of confirmation that they were on the right track. Alex's gaze drifted over to Dr. Harris, who was pacing in front of the class, effortlessly outlining the steps to solve the equation. Alex's hand shot up instinctively. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. Dr. Harris raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting a student to speak up so early in the lecture. He pointed to Alex, but there was a coolness in his tone when he spoke. "Do you have a different approach to the problem, Mr. Alex?" There was an almost dismissive edge to his words. Alex could feel the weight of the professor's gaze, the subtle challenge in it. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts before answering. He didn't want to come across as arrogant, but he wasn't going to hide his knowledge either. "Well, Professor," Alex said, "I think there's a faster way to get to the solution if we look at the problem from a different angle. Instead of solving step by step, we could use a principle that eliminates a few of the intermediate steps. It's a shortcut, but it's based on the same fundamental principles you've outlined." Alex's calm and methodical explanation hung in the air. The other students turned their heads, whispering among themselves. Dr. Harris didn't seem impressed. He glanced at the board, then back at Alex, his eyes narrowing slightly. "That's an interesting perspective, Mr. Alex," he said, his voice flat. "But we'll see if that shortcut works for the entire class. You may have missed a few nuances of the problem." Alex held his gaze, refusing to back down. The comment was meant to deflate him, to put him in his place, but Alex didn't care. He knew what he was capable of, and if Dr. Harris couldn't see that, it wasn't his problem. The rest of the class passed without incident, but Alex could feel the tension between him and the professor. There was no doubt in his mind that Dr. Harris saw him as nothing more than another student trying to prove himself. What he didn't know was that Alex had already surpassed the material they were covering. He didn't just understand the concepts, they were second nature to him. But Alex wasn't interested in being the smartest kid in the room. He was there to learn, to challenge himself, and to show the world that he wasn't just another statistic. As the class ended, Alex gathered his things and walked out of the lecture hall, his mind buzzing with ideas. He didn't need to prove anything to Dr. Harris. But by the end of the semester, the professor and everyone else in that room would know exactly who Alex was. The game had just begun, and Alex was ready to play. The challenge. The days that followed the first lecture were a blur of disbelief for Alex. As he walked through the campus, he could sense the whispers and stares from the other students. They had already formed their opinions, and it was clear that most of them believed Alex didn't belong in the world of academia, not in the way they did. The constant murmurs behind his back, the sideways glances, the subtle hints that he was an outsider. It was nothing new. He had faced it his whole life. But at this university, the stakes were higher. He wasn't just some local genius from a small town anymore. He was a student at an Ivy League institution, and here, in this world, the expectations were higher, the judgments harsher, and the consequences more severe. Dr. Harris didn't help matters either. After the incident in the first class, he had barely acknowledged Alex. It was as if the professor was trying to dismiss him, to put him in his place without saying a word. Every class after that, Dr. Harris continued to look over Alex's head, calling on the students who had the right look, those who fit into the mold of what a university student should be. And each time Alex spoke up, his answers were met with an almost dismissive nod. Alex could see it in the professor's eyes. Dr. Harris wanted to prove that Alex was out of his depth, that he didn't belong. It wasn't enough for the professor to be indifferent. He needed to keep Alex in line. But Alex wasn't one to back down. He had grown used to the idea that people would judge him based on the color of his skin or the clothes he wore, but he knew his worth. And he knew that if he just kept quiet, if he played by the rules and hid his intelligence like everyone else expected, he'd never get the respect he deserved. No, Alex wasn't going to sit in the back and fade into the background. He had to fight for his place, even if that meant challenging the very people who held the keys to his future. As the semester continued, Dr. Harris seemed more and more determined to undermine him. He would intentionally call on Alex with questions he knew would stump him, making sure that the rest of the class was watching when Alex hesitated. The moment of silence would hang in the air, the uncomfortable feeling of failure spreading through the room. It was a game for Dr. Harris, a way to reaffirm his dominance, but Alex wasn't intimidated. He wasn't going to let this professor or anyone else define his limits. But it was a different challenge that would come next, one that Alex hadn't anticipated, and it would push him to the edge. The midterm exam was announced, and the entire class buzzed with anxiety. It wasn't just any exam. It was one that had been notoriously difficult for years. In fact, the problem on the exam had become something of a legend among the students, a question that no one had been able to solve in decades. Dr. Harris had built his reputation on this problem, using it as a way to test the students' limits and prove that even the brightest minds would eventually hit a wall. When the day of the exam arrived, Alex was ready. He had spent countless nights studying, going over every possible angle of every problem in the textbook. He knew the material inside and out. But the moment he sat down at his desk, the weight of the situation hit him. It wasn't just a test of his mathematical abilities. It was a test of his place in this world, of his right to be here. He could already feel the weight of Dr. Harris's gaze on him, could feel the professor watching, waiting for him to fail. The exam started and Alex dived in. The first few questions were straightforward, but it was the last problem that had everyone on edge. It was the infamous problem, the one that had been part of the curriculum for as long as anyone could remember. Students had spent weeks trying to crack it, but no one had ever succeeded. Alex stared at it, his mind racing. He knew this was his moment, the chance to prove to himself and everyone else that he wasn't just another student with a story. He was a force to be reckoned with. He stared at the equation, the symbols and numbers on the paper swimming before his eyes. There was something about it that felt different this time, like the solution was just beyond reach but not out of sight. Alex took a deep breath and focused. He wasn't going to try to solve it the way everyone else had. The traditional methods weren't working for a reason. They weren't the right approach. Alex closed his eyes for a moment, visualizing the problem in his mind. He didn't need to look at the paper. The solution was already forming, unfolding like a hidden pattern in the chaos. His mind raced, connecting ideas and strategies he had read about, but none of them seemed to work. Then something clicked, a breakthrough. He saw a way forward, a method no one had tried before. His hand moved swiftly across the paper, solving the problem step by step, a solution emerging that was elegant in its simplicity. He finished the question, but there was no time to celebrate. He had to move on to the other questions, but his mind kept drifting back to that problem. He had done it, he had cracked it. No one else had been able to solve it in decades, but Alex had found the key. As the exam came to a close, Alex handed in his paper and left the room, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what the outcome would be. He didn't know if Dr. Harris would see the solution for what it was or dismiss it as a fluke. But for the first time in weeks, Alex felt a sense of peace. He had done the work, he had pushed through the doubts, and now it was out of his hands. The next few days were tense as the rest of the students awaited their results, and Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. He didn't know how the professors would react, but he had a gut feeling that this would be the turning point, the moment that would change everything. Dr. Harris announced the results in class, and as the papers were handed back, the room fell into a hushed silence. The students whispered amongst themselves, but Alex kept his eyes straight ahead, refusing to let anyone see the anxiety creeping into his chest. When Dr. Harris finally reached his desk, he paused for a moment, staring at Alex's paper. The professor's face hardened, and Alex felt his heart race. This was it, the moment when everything could either fall apart or change forever. Dr. Harris glanced around the room and then looked directly at Alex. "Mr. Alex," he said, his voice colder than usual. "You've surprised me." The words hung in the air and Alex's chest tightened. He wasn't sure if this was praise or condemnation. The professor continued, but it wasn't the recognition Alex had hoped for. Instead, Dr. Harris dismissed the solution, offering no real acknowledgement of Alex's achievement. But that didn't matter. Alex knew what he had done. He had proven something to himself, and that, more than anything, would keep him moving forward. The test days after the midterm, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. The exam results had become the talk of the campus, but in the midst of all the whispers and gossip, one thought kept circling in his mind. How would Dr. Harris respond? Despite the professor's dismissive attitude toward his solution, Alex had felt a strange sense of anticipation, a conviction that what he had done wasn't just another problem solved. It was a challenge, a declaration that would either force people to recognize his brilliance or push them further into denial. Alex didn't care about the recognition. What mattered to him was the quiet, undeniable truth that he had unlocked something that no one had even seen before. It wasn't long before the answer arrived, though not in the way Alex had expected. One morning, as he sat in the university's vast library, poring over his next set of problems, he received an email notification. It was from Dr. Harris, and it was an invitation, a direct summons to meet with the professor in his office. There was no mention of the exam result in the subject line, only a brief line that read, "Come immediately after class today." Alex's heart raced as he closed his laptop and made his way across campus. The weight of the invitation pressed on him. It felt like both a threat and an opportunity, but he knew he had to face whatever was coming. Walking through the hallways, Alex passed by the usual students. Some of them gave him wary glances, others whispered behind their hands. He had become something of a spectacle in the few days since the midterm, a subject of gossip among his peers. They couldn't understand how a student from his background could achieve something so remarkable. and that bothered them more than they cared to admit. It was a subtle kind of resentment, a feeling that somehow Alex had cheated the system, even though he had done nothing more than prove his worth. Arriving at Dr. Harris's office, Alex paused outside the door. The heavy wooden frame of the professor's office seemed to symbolize the power the professor held. The polished mahogany desk, the rows of neatly stacked books, the degree certificates lining the walls, everything about the space screamed authority. Alex took a deep breath and knocked. "Come in," Dr. Harris's voice called out, sharp and commanding. Alex opened the door, stepping inside with a steady resolve, even though his pulse was racing. Dr. Harris sat behind his desk, looking at a stack of papers, though Alex could tell from his posture that the professor was waiting for him. The professor's face was unreadable as he motioned for Alex to take a seat. "Mr. Alex," Dr. Harris began, his tone colder than usual. "I've been reviewing your work from the midterm, and I have to admit I'm surprised. You seem to have solved the problem in a way that none of my previous students have. It's not conventional, but the solution is correct. It's impressive, even if I don't fully understand how you arrived at it." Alex sat back in his chair, trying to mask the sense of vindication that began to swell within him. He didn't let his satisfaction show. He had anticipated the professor's reluctance, but he hadn't expected the faint flicker of curiosity that crossed Dr. Harris's face. The professor's eyes narrowed, studying him. "However," Dr. Harris continued, "I can't help but wonder if you didn't miss something in your approach. I've been thinking about your solution for days, and it seems to me that there's something about it that doesn't quite fit with the way we've always approached these kinds of problems. This shortcut you used, while it worked in this case, may not be applicable in every situation." Alex felt a familiar frustration building inside him, but he kept his voice calm. "Professor, sometimes the way we've always done things isn't the only way. The rules are based on principles, and when you understand the principles, you can adapt them to new situations. I didn't miss anything. I found a solution that worked." Dr. Harris looked at him for a long moment, and for a second, Alex thought the professor might dismiss him entirely, but instead the older man leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled in front of him. "Tell me, Alex," Dr. Harris said, his voice now taking on a more contemplative tone. "Do you think your approach is replicable? Can you show me how this method might work for other problems, beyond the scope of what we've discussed so far?" Alex's heart skipped. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Dr. Harris wasn't challenging him anymore. He was asking for his help, for his insight. It was a subtle shift, but it was there. Alex took a deep breath and nodded. "I can show you. I've been thinking about it since the exam. I've already tested it with a few other problems that no one else has been able to solve, and the results were consistent. I'll demonstrate it for you." The professor gave him a skeptical look but gestured for him to continue. Alex reached into his bag and pulled out a notebook, flipping to the pages where he had jotted down his ideas and calculations. He stood and moved to the whiteboard on the far side of the office. As he worked through the equations, his hand moving swiftly across the surface, Alex could feel the eyes of Dr. Harris on him, measuring his every move. But this time Alex wasn't nervous. This time he was in control. He worked through several complex problems, showing how his method not only solved the current equation, but could be adapted to other unsolved problems in the field. Each calculation seemed to carry more weight, more evidence that his solution wasn't just a fluke. It was real. It was powerful. And Dr. Harris watched, his expression gradually shifting from skepticism to something closer to awe. As Alex finished his final explanation, he turned back to face the professor. Dr. Harris didn't speak for several moments. The silence stretched, and Alex felt the tension in the room as the professor processed what he had just witnessed. "I've never seen anything like it," Dr. Harris finally admitted, his voice uncharacteristically humble. "This isn't extraordinary. It's groundbreaking, Alex. You've proven that there's a new way to look at these problems. You've cracked something that no one else has even come close to." Alex felt a surge of pride, but he didn't let it show. The professor's words, while impressive, weren't the validation he had been seeking. The real victory was knowing that he had proven his worth, not to Dr. Harris, but to himself. "Doctor," Harris continued, though his tone had softened, "I'll need to present this to my colleagues. This could change everything, Alex. You've just created a new paradigm for solving these kinds of problems. But I need to warn you. There will be resistance. There always is. There are people who won't be happy about this. Alex nodded. I'm ready for that. I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing it because I know it's the right way forward. Dr. Harris looked at him for a long time, then finally stood and extended his hand. Well then, Alex, it seems I owe you an apology. I may have underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again. Alex shook his hand, but he knew that this was just the beginning. The real test was coming. And this time, he would be ready. The revelation. The days following his meeting with Dr. Harris were a whirlwind for Alex. The professor had promised to present Alex's work to his colleagues, but Alex didn't know how much of that would truly reach the academic community. Alex had spent his life proving people wrong, and he had learned long ago that real change didn't come easily. It didn't matter how groundbreaking your work was or how much evidence you had behind it. There was always resistance, especially when you were challenging the very foundation of something as entrenched as traditional academia. Despite his reservations, Alex couldn't deny the thrill that ran through him when he received the news. Dr. Harris had organized a small meeting with several senior professors from the department, and they wanted to see Alex's solution firsthand. It was a chance for Alex to show that what he had done was not just a fluke, not just a one-time stroke of brilliance, but something that could redefine the way mathematics was done. But in the back of his mind, he knew that this wasn't going to be a smooth ride. Nothing ever was. Alex sat in the small conference room, his mind racing as he waited for the professors to arrive. The room was stark, with long wooden tables and white walls lined with old academic degrees. The atmosphere was formal, cold, and a little intimidating. Alex had been in meetings like this before where the people in charge had no interest in anything that didn't fit into their narrow view of the world. But today, something felt different. Dr. Harris had come around, and Alex had a feeling that he wasn't the only one who would have to confront his biases. When the door opened, Dr. Harris walked in first, followed by two other professors from the department, Professor Reynolds, a grizzled veteran of the field, and Professor Mitchell, a young but well-respected theorist. Both of them had the same skeptical look on their faces as they took their seats. Alex sat up straighter, steeling himself for whatever was coming. He had prepared for this moment, gone over every detail of his work, ready to answer any questions they might have. I'll keep this brief, Dr. Harris said, his voice authoritative. Alex has demonstrated a solution to a problem that has plagued mathematicians for decades. It's unconventional, but the results are undeniable. What you're about to see could change the way we approach complex mathematical problems. It's not just a breakthrough, it's a revolution. Alex felt his pulse quicken as all eyes turned toward him. He stood, walking to the whiteboard in the front of the room. He knew that this was the moment when everything could either collapse or explode. He had been in situations like this before, his worth being measured by people who didn't understand his journey, who didn't see the hours of sacrifice and study that had brought him to this point. But this time, it was different. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about the work. It was about the future of mathematics, and Alex was going to make sure it was seen for what it was. He began to write on the board, his hand moving confidently as he worked through the problem. As he spoke, explaining his method step by step, he could see the professors listening more intently, leaning forward in their chairs. There was no longer any dismissive attitude, no condescension in their eyes. Instead, there was something else, something Alex hadn't expected. Respect. This is incredible, Professor Reynolds said, his voice hoarse with disbelief. You're telling me that this approach could be applied to more than just this one problem? You've created a new framework for solving similar equations. Alex nodded. Yes, it's adaptable. The principles I've outlined aren't tied to any specific equation or type of problem. It's a methodology, a way of thinking about mathematical relationships that opens up new avenues for solving problems that have stumped people for centuries. It's not just about solving one problem. It's about unlocking new possibilities. The professors exchanged looks, and Alex could see the skepticism in their eyes starting to waver. They had expected something impressive, but not this. Not something that threatened to change the way they had thought about their field for years. Professor Mitchell, who had been quiet up until now, finally spoke. "Can you demonstrate this with other examples?" he asked, his tone more curious than dismissive. "You say it's a new framework. Show us how it works with problems we haven't seen before." Alex didn't hesitate. He pulled out another sheet of paper, quickly working through another complex problem that had stumped even the most brilliant minds in the department. As he explained his reasoning, connecting the dots between concepts that had never before been connected, the professors watched in stunned silence. They had expected to see a good solution, but not this. Not a paradigm shift. By the time Alex finished his demonstration, the room was electric with excitement. For the first time in a long time, Alex felt like the underdog had finally won. The professors were no longer looking at him with skepticism or doubt. They were looking at him as a peer, as someone who had just shown them something they hadn't seen before. There was no question now. Alex had proven his point. His solution wasn't just valid, it was groundbreaking. Dr. Harris stood up, his voice breaking the silence. This is extraordinary, Alex. I had no idea. I thought I understood mathematics, but what you've done here is beyond anything I could have imagined. This isn't just an isolated solution. It's a new way of thinking. You've rewritten the rules." Alex felt a swell of pride in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral. This wasn't about proving himself to these professors anymore. He had already done that. Now it was about showing the world that he, a student who had been underestimated, had cracked something that could change the future of the field. He had created something that belonged to him alone. Professor Reynolds nodded slowly, still absorbing the implications of what he had seen. "I'm going to need to see this published. This needs to be shared with the broader academic community. There's no way we can keep this to ourselves." Alex looked at them, feeling a sense of finality in the air. This was the moment. His work would be published. It would be recognized and the world would see what he had done. But more than that, this was his victory. He had fought for his place, fought for recognition, and now it was his to claim. But just as he thought the moment would pass, Dr. Harris turned to him and said, "There's still one thing, Alex." Alex raised an eyebrow, not sure what else the professor could possibly want to discuss. "What's that?" Dr. Harris's expression softened. "This breakthrough, it's going to change a lot of things. But you need to be prepared. There will be resistance, even from those who call themselves your allies. Some people don't like change, but you've already proven that you're up to the challenge." Alex nodded, his resolve as strong as ever. "I've faced resistance my whole life. I'm ready for whatever comes next." And with that, the professors left, their minds racing with the potential of what Alex had just shown them. For Alex, the real journey had just begun. The academic world had underestimated him, but now it had no choice but to take notice. He had changed everything, and the world would never be the same again. The betrayal, the buzz around Alex's breakthrough spread quickly, like wildfire, through the academic halls of the university. Professors, students, and researchers from other departments began seeking him out, eager to understand his work, to learn from him. Alex found himself at the center of attention, something he had never craved but couldn't escape. While he had always been an outsider, someone whose brilliance had been hidden by the labels others placed on him, now he was the one people sought after. His once quiet life was gone, replaced by the overwhelming pressure of expectations. It wasn't just about solving problems anymore. He had shifted the balance of power within the university, and that came with its own set of challenges. Despite the praise and newfound respect, there was something unsettling in the air. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The professors who had once dismissed him, who had made him feel like he didn't belong, now spoke of him in reverent tones. They invited him to conferences, offered him mentorship, and asked for his insights on their own research. Yet in the back of his mind, Alex knew something was brewing. He had seen it before, the way some people would embrace you when it served them, but once you became a threat, once you had something they couldn't control, their true nature would show. Dr. Harris had been particularly solicitous, speaking highly of Alex to his colleagues, and even attending some of Alex's lectures to show his support. But in the professor's eyes, there was something more, something that made Alex uneasy. Dr. Harris's praise was genuine, but there was also an underlying current of possessiveness. It was as if the professor saw Alex's success as something he could claim ownership over, something that could enhance his own standing within the academic community. Alex didn't know how to navigate this. On one hand, he needed Dr. Harris's support. On the other, he could sense the professor's subtle attempts to control the narrative, to ensure that Alex's success reflected well on him, too. It was, during one of these interactions in a quiet moment after a lecture, that things began to unravel. Alex was packing his notes into his bag when Dr. Harris approached him, a carefully composed smile on his face. "You've done exceptional work, Alex," Dr. Harris said, his voice smooth, but there was an edge to it. "But I think you need to understand that the academic world is about more than just brilliance. It's about positioning, about playing the game. You've made a powerful impression, but now we need to ensure that your work gets the recognition it deserves. That means aligning with the right people, making the right moves." Alex paused, feeling a tightness in his chest. The words were casual, but he knew what Dr. Harris was implying. "I'm not interested in playing games, Professor," Alex replied, his voice steady. "I want my work to speak for itself. That's all." Dr. Harris chuckled, though there was no warmth in it. "That's naive, Alex. You can't just solve equations and expect the world to come to you. You need to navigate the politics of academia. There are powerful forces at play, and you need allies." Alex didn't respond immediately. He wasn't sure how to take Dr. Harris's advice. It wasn't that he didn't understand the politics of the world he was now in. He did. But he had always prided himself on not needing to play those games. He had earned his place through sheer merit, through intellect and hard work. But Dr. Harris wasn't done yet. "There's another thing," Dr. Harris continued, leaning closer. "The university is going to want to publish your work in their most prestigious journals. But you need to be careful. People will be looking for a way to discredit you. You've already caused quite a stir, and there are many who won't be happy about it. You need to be ready for the backlash." Alex frowned. "Backlash from who?" "From the old guard," Dr. Harris said, his eyes narrowing. "From those who feel threatened by someone like you, a young, unknown student coming out of nowhere and shaking up the system. They'll try to discredit your work, try to say that it's unoriginal or incomplete. I've seen it happen before. People who break new ground often face intense resistance, not just from outside but from their own colleagues." Alex didn't like the way the conversation was going. It was as if Dr. Harris was warning him about something, but also subtly preparing him to face an inevitable challenge. The professor was painting a picture of a world that seemed far more treacherous than Alex had anticipated. He had always known that success in academia wasn't just about solving problems. It was about power, influence, and how well you could navigate the system. But hearing it so plainly, from someone who had once been a mentor, left a bad taste in his mouth. Later that week, Alex received an unexpected email from a senior professor in another department. The email was terse, requesting a meeting to discuss his work. Alex, intrigued but wary, agreed to meet the professor in his office. When he arrived, the atmosphere was tense. Professor Edwards, an older man with a reputation for being both brilliant and ruthless, didn't mince words. "I've reviewed your solution to the problem," Professor Edwards said, his eyes cold. "And frankly, I don't think it's as groundbreaking as everyone is making it out to be. It's incomplete, amateurish even. You've made some interesting connections, but the way you've applied them is, quite frankly, naive. There are holes in your work, serious ones, and I plan to make that known." Alex's stomach twisted. This was the backlash Dr. Harris had warned him about, but it came far sooner than he had expected. Professor Edwards didn't stop there. "I don't think you understand what you've stumbled upon," Edwards continued. "This isn't just a solution to an equation. What you're proposing could upset the entire field. And that's why I can't let it be published without further scrutiny. I'll be taking this to the department chair. You'll need to defend your work before the academic council." Alex's mind raced. The weight of Edwards's words hung in the air, suffocating him. He had known this moment might come, but the way it had arrived, so suddenly, so forcefully, caught him off guard. He tried to remain composed. "I don't believe there's anything wrong with my work, Professor," Alex said, his voice firm. "I've tested it extensively. It works, I'm confident in it." Professor Edwards gave him a pointed look. "Confidence isn't enough. You'll have to prove it under scrutiny. This isn't about you, Alex. It's about the field. And there are people who won't accept your method. People who don't want their theories challenged." It was clear now. Edwards wasn't just questioning Alex's work. He was trying to tear it down. He wasn't going to let Alex's breakthrough go unchallenged. This wasn't about the truth. It was about power, and Alex had become a target. He knew the fight ahead would be long and hard, but what he didn't know was that the betrayal would cut deeper than just the academic community. His own mentor, Dr. Harris, had subtly begun to distance himself from Alex, just as Edwards had predicted. What had once been a partnership of mutual respect was now slipping into a game of survival, and Alex was beginning to see just how alone he was in this fight. As the days passed, the resistance only grew stronger. The whispers in the hallways grew louder, the subtle undermining of his work more pronounced. Alex knew he had to act fast. He couldn't rely on anyone anymore. He would have to stand alone, fight alone, and prove that his brilliance was not a mistake, that it was real, and that it was his to claim. The final stand. Alex stood in the university's central hall, watching as the students filed in for yet another lecture. But today was different. Today the university was going to hold its long-awaited academic council meeting, where Alex's groundbreaking work was to be put to the test. For days, the atmosphere around him had grown tense, like a pressure cooker building toward an inevitable explosion. Whispers had spread through the halls, some in favor of his work, others dismissing him as a fraud. His name had become a battleground, a symbol of both progress and resistance. And now, it was time for the final reckoning. He had spent the last few days preparing for this moment, knowing that every step he took in the council meeting would be scrutinized. Every word he spoke would be weighed against the entrenched powers of the academic world. He had pored over his work again and again, making sure his calculations, his methodology, were sound. But it wasn't just the math that he was preparing for. It was the political game, the subtle maneuvering that would be necessary to survive this battle. Dr. Harris had promised to support him, but Alex could see through the professor's thinly veiled concern. Harris had changed. His once sincere mentorship had become more transactional, and Alex now saw the strings pulling behind the scenes. The professor had distanced himself from Alex in subtle ways, refusing to speak publicly about the breakthrough that had set the university on fire. It wasn't outright betrayal, but it was the slow erosion of trust, the quiet shift of loyalty. Dr. Harris had become a cautious ally, a man who valued his own position within the system more than the potential of his student. As Alex walked into the council meeting room, his heart pounded in his chest. The room was large, lined with dark wood panels and bookshelves filled with dusty volumes of academic journals. The air felt heavy with the weight of history, of generations of scholars whose names had lived on because they had shaped the way people thought, the way people saw the world. And now, Alex was here to carve his own name into that history. But what he didn't know was whether the world was ready for what he had to offer. The academic council was a body of powerful figures from across the university, professors who had spent decades building their reputations, fighting for their place in the intellectual hierarchy. The room was filled with older, more established academics who had seen it all, who had faced their own battles for recognition, and were unwilling to let some young, unknown student upend their world. The tension in the room was palpable as Alex took his seat at the front, directly across from the council members. There was no warmth in their gazes, no welcoming smiles. Instead, their eyes were cold, calculating, as they assessed him and his work with a mix of suspicion and skepticism. The head of the council, Professor Edwards, who had been one of his biggest critics, sat at the center, his stern face framed by glasses that seemed to magnify the coldness in his gaze. "Alex," Edwards began, his voice smooth but laced with an undercurrent of disdain. You've brought us here today to present a solution that claims to revolutionize the way we approach mathematical problems. But before we proceed, I think it's only fair to remind you that this is not just about your ability to solve equations. It's about the credibility of your work. It's about the future of mathematics as we know it. Alex took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He had been through so much already. The whispers, the doubt, the undermining. But now this was his moment. This was his chance to show the world that his work wasn't just some fluke, some misstep. It was real, and it was going to change everything. I understand, Professor, Alex said, his voice calm but firm. I know that my work challenges traditional methods, but that's the point. Innovation has always required challenging the status quo. If we never questioned the way things were done, we would never move forward. Mathematics has always been about discovery, about breaking boundaries, and that's exactly what I've done. There was a murmur of disapproval from some of the professors around the table, and Alex could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on him. But he didn't back down. He was done playing by their rules, pretending to fit into their expectations. He had proven his worth, and now he was going to demand the respect he deserved. Professor Reynolds, who had been silent up until now, cleared his throat and spoke. But Alex, you've created something that no one here fully understands. Your method works in theory, but theory is nothing without practical application. Can you guarantee that what you've done will stand up to scrutiny beyond the confines of this university? Can you show us that your work has real-world applications? Alex nodded confidently. I've already tested my method in real-world scenarios. I've applied it to problems that go beyond the theoretical. I've worked with colleagues in other fields to test its viability, and the results have been consistent. This is not just a theoretical model. It's a practical tool for solving complex problems. The room fell silent, the council members exchanging glances. There was doubt, but there was also curiosity. Alex could see that they were starting to realize that there was more to his work than they had initially thought. But they weren't going to let go of their skepticism so easily. They needed more than just words, they needed proof. Dr. Harris finally spoke, his voice low and steady. Alex's work isn't just groundbreaking. It's revolutionary. I've seen it myself. I've worked with him personally to explore the implications of this methodology. And while I understand the reluctance of some of my colleagues to accept such a radical shift, I believe the evidence speaks for itself. For a moment, it felt as though the room had held its breath. Dr. Harris's words, though measured, carried a weight that Alex had not expected. The professor was publicly backing him, acknowledging his work and supporting him in front of the council. It wasn't the ringing endorsement that Alex had hoped for, but it was something. It was a crack in the resistance that had surrounded him since the beginning. But as the meeting wore on, Alex realized that this wasn't going to be a clean victory. The council was divided, and no matter how strong his arguments were, there were forces in the room that would never accept his work. The resistance was coming from within the very institution that should have supported him, from the people who had spent their careers entrenched in their own theories. The old guard wasn't about to let go of their power so easily. As the meeting neared its end, Alex's frustration began to rise. This wasn't just about proving his work. It was about proving himself, about showing that someone like him could not only belong in the halls of academia, but could redefine them. He knew that the fight ahead wasn't going to be easy, and he knew that the odds were stacked against him. But this time he wasn't going to back down. He wasn't going to let them take this from him. When the final vote was cast, it was clear that the council was divided. Some had come around to Alex's side, but there were still too many who refused to accept his work. The decision was a compromise. His method would be published, but only after extensive peer review. It was a victory, but it wasn't the resounding one Alex had hoped for. Still, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had made it through. He had fought for his place, and he had earned it. As the council adjourned, Alex walked out of the room, his mind spinning. He had won, but the war wasn't over. There were still many battles ahead, still many forces who would try to stop him. But for the first time in his life, Alex felt something he hadn't known he was capable of feeling: hope. He had fought for his future, and he had come out on top. This was just the beginning. A new dawn. The weeks following the academic council meeting were a whirlwind of activity for Alex. The vote had passed, but it was far from the sweeping victory he had envisioned. The peer review process was grueling as expected, with academic journals publishing critiques of his methodology, pointing out flaws, offering alternate explanations, and suggesting that his breakthrough might be nothing more than a lucky series of coincidences. Alex didn't let any of it get to him, though. He had known from the beginning that his work would face resistance, and he had long since learned that true innovation never came without pushback. Every challenge, every attempt to undermine him, only fueled his determination further. Dr. Harris had kept his distance since the council meeting. The professor had supported him publicly, but Alex could sense the underlying tension in their relationship. The professor had become more distant, more preoccupied with his own standing in the academic world. He had stepped back from offering Alex guidance, and Alex felt that subtle withdrawal. It was clear that Dr. Harris had his own motivations. While he had been the one to present Alex's work to the council, he had been careful not to give Alex too much of the spotlight. It was as if he feared what would happen if Alex took the full credit for the revolution in mathematical theory. Alex was no fool. He knew that Dr. Harris, despite his support, had a stake in controlling the narrative of Alex's success. But Alex didn't care anymore. He wasn't interested in playing the academic game the way Dr. Harris had. He wasn't seeking validation from those who had once doubted him. He was done waiting for permission to be great. The world was changing, and Alex was at the center of it. He knew that his work would eventually speak for itself, even if it took time. One afternoon, as Alex was heading back to his dorm after another grueling day of research, he received an email that would change everything. It was from Professor Reynolds, one of the council members who had been skeptical of Alex's work at first. The subject line read, "Invitation to present at Global Conference on Mathematical Innovation." His heart skipped a beat as he clicked open the email. In it, Professor Reynolds wrote, "After further review of your work and following extensive discussions with colleagues in various departments, we have come to the conclusion that your methodology has the potential to change the landscape of mathematical problem solving. We would like to invite you to present your findings at the Global Conference on Mathematical Innovation in Zurich next month. This would be an opportunity for your work to be recognized on a global scale." Alex sat back in his chair, feeling a wave of disbelief wash over him. The invitation was more than just an opportunity to showcase his work. It was a validation that his ideas had transcended the confines of the university. This was the recognition he had fought so hard for, but more importantly, it was the chance to finally prove that his breakthrough was not just a fluke, not just something he had imagined in isolation. It was real, and it was going to change the world. The days leading up to the conference were a blur of preparation. Alex had already published a few papers detailing his methodology, but the conference was going to be his chance to speak directly to the world's leading experts in the field. It was a moment that could define the rest of his career, and he was determined not to squander it. When the day of the conference finally arrived, Alex stood before a crowd of hundreds of academics, researchers, and industry leaders from around the globe. He felt the weight of the moment. The eyes of the world's brightest minds were on him, waiting for him to deliver the speech that would confirm whether his work was truly groundbreaking or simply the product of youthful arrogance. But as Alex stepped up to the podium and looked out at the sea of faces, he realized something. This wasn't just about him. It wasn't about proving his worth to anyone in the room. It was about the work, about the impact his ideas could have on the world. He had spent so long battling the academic establishment, fighting to have his voice heard, but now, in this moment, it was clear this was bigger than him. This was about making a difference. He began his presentation, speaking with clarity and confidence, explaining his methodology, the breakthroughs he had discovered, and how his work could be applied to real-world problems that had previously been deemed unsolvable. The audience was captivated, hanging on his every word as he walked them through complex equations, demonstrating how his approach could not only solve mathematical problems, but also open doors to new fields of study. It wasn't just the content of his speech that captivated the audience, it was his passion, his belief in what he had done, and his conviction that his work could change the world. As he finished his presentation, there was a moment of silence in the room. Alex held his breath, waiting for the inevitable questions, the critiques, the doubts. But when the first question came, it wasn't a criticism. It was a request for more information. a deep dive into how his methodology could be expanded to solve even more complex problems. The next question was similar, another request for clarification on how his work could be applied across different industries. The audience wasn't just interested in his ideas, they were excited about the possibilities his work opened up. For the first time, Alex felt like he wasn't just some kid with a new idea. He was a trailblazer, a force that had the power to shape the future. The conference went on for days, but by the time it ended, Alex had received offers from leading research institutions, industry leaders, and even venture capitalists who wanted to fund his research. The invitations to collaborate came pouring in, and for the first time Alex realized that the world was no longer underestimating him. They were seeking him out, eager to tap into his brilliance, eager to learn from the very person they had once doubted. But it wasn't just the academic world that had taken notice. Outside the walls of academia, Alex's work began to gain traction as well. He was invited to speak on podcasts, to write for industry journals, and to consult with companies that saw the potential in his work. His name was becoming synonymous with innovation, and the world was finally beginning to see him for what he was. A genius who had defied the odds, broken the mold, and changed the way the world thought about mathematics. As Alex stood on the balcony of his hotel room in Zurich, looking out over the city, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. The fight had been long and difficult, but he had made it. He had proven that brilliance could come from anyone, no matter their background, no matter the obstacles in their way. He had fought for his place in the world, and now the world was his to shape. In that moment, Alex knew that this was just the beginning. The journey he had started was far from over, but he had laid the foundation for a future where his ideas could change the world. He wasn't just a student anymore. He was a leader, a pioneer, and his story was one of triumph over adversity. The world had underestimated him, but now, the world would see exactly who Alex was, and who he would become. The final triumph. The world had changed in ways Alex had never expected. He stood at the threshold of a future that seemed so far out of reach just a few short months ago. The recognition, the accolades, the invitations, it was all overwhelming, but in a way it was just the beginning. Everything he had worked for, every sleepless night spent perfecting his theories, every moment of doubt and frustration, had led to this point. But as he reflected on everything that had happened, he realized that the true victory wasn't the applause or the papers or the offers that had come pouring in. The real victory was in the fact that he had stayed true to himself. Alex had fought for his place in a world that didn't expect someone like him to succeed. He had faced prejudice, skepticism, and outright rejection, but he had never backed down. Even when the odds were stacked against him, when it seemed like the doors of academia were closed to him, he had found a way through. His breakthrough had changed not just the way people thought about mathematics, but the way they thought about talent, about intelligence, about potential. It wasn't about where you came from or who you knew. It was about what you could do and how far you were willing to go to prove it. As Alex stood in front of a group of students at a university lecture hall, preparing to give another talk, he felt a sense of pride swell within him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about inspiring others, showing them that no matter where they came from, no matter what obstacles they faced, they could achieve greatness too. He had been the underdog, the one no one believed in, but now he was the one they looked to for guidance, for inspiration, and that was worth more than any degree, more than any journal article. He had created something that would last long after he was gone, a legacy of possibility. Looking out at the room full of eager faces, Alex began his lecture, speaking with a calm confidence that came from knowing he had earned his place. The students were hanging on every word, fascinated by the same ideas that had once been dismissed as impossible. But Alex knew that the greatest thing he could offer them wasn't just the knowledge in his mind. It was the belief that they too could achieve something extraordinary, that they too could change the world. In the years that followed, Alex's work became a cornerstone of modern mathematics. His methods were adopted by researchers and scientists around the globe, revolutionizing industries and opening new doors to innovation. He didn't just change one field, he changed the way people approached problems. He had proven that brilliance wasn't confined to the established elite. It was found in unexpected places, in people who were willing to challenge the norms and push the boundaries. But even as his career flourished, Alex never forgot the struggles he had faced. He continued to mentor students from underrepresented backgrounds, offering them the same opportunities he had fought for. He used his platform to speak out against inequality in academia, against the biases that still held back talented individuals from achieving their potential. And through it all, he remained grounded, always remembering that it wasn't the accolades or the fame that defined him. It was the work, the impact, and the knowledge that he had helped create something that would outlive him. One evening, as Alex sat in his office reflecting on the path he had taken, he received a message from an old professor. Dr. Harris, the man who had once doubted him, who had tried to steer him into the political games of academia, had written a letter of his own. In it, he acknowledged Alex's achievements, and for the first time he wrote something Alex had never expected: an apology. Dr. Harris admitted that he had been wrong, that he had underestimated Alex and had let his own pride get in the way of recognizing true brilliance. The letter was brief, but it carried weight, a reminder that even those who had tried to hold him back could see the truth of his work now. Alex closed the letter, a quiet smile playing on his lips. The journey had been long, but it had been worth every step. The doubts, the betrayals, the isolation, none of it had been in vain. He had forged his path, and now, the world was following. As Alex walked out into the city streets, the wind blowing gently against his face, he realized that this wasn't the end. It wasn't the final chapter of his story. It was just another beginning. There were more problems to solve, more barriers to break, and more minds to inspire. And no matter what came next, Alex knew that he would continue to fight for the ideas, for the future, and for those who would come after him, ready to challenge the world and change it forever. The end.